August 13th, 1944. The sun is beating down on Digne-les-Bains. In the town prison, 3 British agents are hours away from execution. They have been caught, their covers blown. The firing squad is already chosen. A lone woman walks toward the prison gates. She carries no machine gun, no explosives, and no backup. Her weapon is a lie so immense it defies belief. She walks straight up to the Gestapo liaison, a collaborator named Albert Schenk. She doesn't plead. She tells him she is the niece of British General Montgomery, that the Allies are coming, and if those prisoners die, she will have him torn apart by the mob. It is a poker game played against death itself. If she blinks, 3 men die. To understand how a former Polish beauty queen ended up commanding the fear of the Gestapo in a dusty French office, we have to go back to the beginning. Her name was Krystyna Skarbek. Born into the Polish aristocracy, she grew up in a world that felt permanent. Horses, country estates, skiing in the Tatra Mountains, and high society balls in Warsaw. She was the daughter of a count and a wealthy Jewish banking heiress. She was stunning, charismatic, and by 1930 she was a runner-up for Miss Poland. But beneath the silk dresses and the title of Countess lay a restless, almost feral spirit. Her father had raised her more like a son than a daughter, teaching her to ride bareback and ski dangerous slopes. She craved adrenaline. When the Wehrmacht smashed across the Polish border in September 1939, the world she knew evaporated overnight. While the government fled and the army collapsed under the weight of German armour from the west and a Soviet invasion from the east, Skarbek didn't run away. She drove toward the sound of the guns. She made her way to London, marched into the British Secret Services, and demanded to be used in the fight. British intelligence didn't know what to do with her. They preferred recruits who were grey, quiet, and unobtrusive. Skarbek was none of those things. She was emotional, flashy, and filled with a burning hatred for the occupiers of her homeland. Traditionalists in Whitehall muttered that women were unsuitable for fieldwork. They thought she was a liability. She would prove them spectacularly wrong. She became the first woman recruited by the Special Operations Executive, SOE, the organisation Churchill ordered to set Europe ablaze. While the bureaucrats argued, Skarbek was already rewriting the rulebook. Her first mission didn't take her to a training camp. It sent her straight back into the freezing hell of occupied Eastern Europe. In 1940, the most dangerous border in Europe was the jagged spine of the Tatra Mountains separating Poland from Slovakia. This was Skarbek's territory. Temperatures here plunged to 30 degrees below zero. The passes were patrolled by German border guards on one side and Soviet troops on the other. Skarbek organised an escape route for Polish pilots and a courier line for intelligence. She didn't just survive these mountains, she owned them. She skied at night, navigating passes that killed less experienced mountaineers. On one run, she was stopped by border guards. She was carrying a large sum of money for the resistance. Most agents would have panicked or reached for a weapon. Skarbek did neither. She simply treated the guards like nuisance servants on her father's estate. She bribed them with the arrogance of a woman who expected obedience. It worked. They let her pass. She wasn't just carrying money. She was smuggling out vital microfilm showing German troop deployments and Soviet tank concentrations. She was the lifeline between the shattered remains of Poland and the Allies in the West. By 1941, she was operating in Budapest with her partner Andrzej Kowerski, a one-legged Polish war hero. But their luck was running thin. The Gestapo had been tracking them. One night, the door was kicked in. They were arrested. The Gestapo interrogation rooms in Budapest were designed to break people. They had the tools, the time, and the sadism to extract the truth. Skarbek and Kowerski were facing certain torture followed by execution. This is where Skarbek's genius for improvisation saved them. She knew the Germans had a deep, almost hysterical fear of disease. Sitting in the interrogation chair, she felt the onset of a flu she had been fighting. She saw an opportunity. She began to cough, a dry, hacking sound. Then, while the interrogators watched, she bit her tongue. She bit it hard, slicing into the tissue until her mouth filled with copper-tasting blood. She coughed again, this time spitting a spray of red blood onto the table and over the hands of the horrified interrogator. Between gasps, she looked him in the eye. "Tuberculosis," she whispered. "I'm dying." The room went silent. To the Germans, TB was the White Plague. It was highly contagious and often fatal. A chest X-ray was ordered immediately. In the medical room, Skarbek used her charm and likely a connection to a sympathetic doctor to swap her X-ray with that of a terminal patient. The results came back. Cavities in the lungs. Advanced infection. Terrified of an outbreak in their prison, the Gestapo threw Skarbek and Kowersky out onto the street. They had been minutes away from death, and she had escaped by weaponizing her own biology. They were smuggled out of Hungary in the trunk of a British diplomatic car. Krystyna Skarbek officially ceased to exist. In her place was Christine Granville, a British subject. But her arrival in Cairo brought a different kind of betrayal. The Polish government, in exile, riddled with paranoia and internal politics, accused her of being a double agent. They couldn't believe a woman could survive the Gestapo without collaborating. The British, wary of offending their Polish allies, sidelined her. For 3 agonizing years, the woman who had skied the Tatras and outwitted the SS sat at a desk in Cairo. She filed reports. She encoded messages. She was a racehorse locked in a stable. It wasn't until 1944, as the preparations for D-Day and the invasion of southern France reached a fever pitch, that the SOE admitted they needed every experienced operator they had. The resistance in southeastern France was becoming a fortress. They needed a courier who could move between scattered units, cross borders, speak languages, and kill if necessary. They needed Pauline. On July 6, 1944, she parachuted into France. The drop went wrong. She landed miles from her intended zone, smashing her hip against the hard limestone of the Vercors Plateau. Limping, she buried her chute and began the long trek to contact the Jockey Network, run by Francis Camards. The south of France that summer was chaos. Retreating German columns were burning villages. Vengeful milice units were hunting the resistance. Allied bombers were pounding the supply lines. Skarbek moved through this landscape like a ghost. Her job was to link Italian partisans on the Alpine border with the French Marquis. This was a diplomatic tightrope that required crossing high mountain passes under the noses of German Alpine troops. The physical demands were brutal. In one instance, she hiked 70 miles in 24 hours to deliver intelligence that would coordinate attacks on German convoys. She replaced the lost radio crystals of a silenced network, restoring the voice of the resistance in the region. But her greatest weapon remained her psychology. At the Col de l'Arche, a strategic pass high in the Alps, the American advance was blocked by a fortress. It was defended by Polish conscripts who had been forced into the German army. A frontal assault would have been a bloodbath. Skarbek didn't sneak past them. She walked up to the fortifications. She carried a megaphone. Standing in the open, exposed to their guns, she spoke to them in perfect Polish. She appealed to their patriotism. She told them the Reich was dying. She told them they could die here as German slaves, or live as Polish heroes. She promised them that if they disabled their heavy guns and walked away, they would be welcomed by the resistance. It worked. 63 men deserted. They destroyed their heavy weapons and joined the Marquis. She had dismantled a fortress with a speech. Then came the disaster at Digne. Francis Camards, codenamed Rocker, was one of the most valuable SOE agents in France. On August 13th, he was travelling with Xana Fielding and a French officer, Christian Sorensen. At a routine checkpoint, their papers were examined a little too closely. A discrepancy in the stamps, a hesitation, and they were arrested. The Gestapo found banknotes with consecutive serial numbers, a clear sign of a recent airdrop. They knew they had caught big fish. The three men were moved to Digny prison. They were interrogated, beaten and scheduled for execution. Standard resistance practice in such cases was a violent assault on the prison. But Digny was swarming with German troops. An attack would be suicide, and the prisoners would likely be shot the moment the first bullet was fired. Skarbek chose another way. She cycled 40 kilometres to Digny. She found the prison. She identified the weak link. It wasn't in the walls, it was in the people. We return to the scene where we started, Skarbek standing before Albert Schenk. She presents herself as a British officer. She produces 2 broken diamond rings. She offers them not just as a bribe, but as a down payment on his survival. She paints a graphic picture of what will happen when the British forces arrive in a few hours. "If they are killed," she says calmly, "I will ensure you are handed to the locals." Schenk is terrified. He knows the war is lost. He wants a lifeboat. But he needs approval from his superior, a Belgian Gestapo interpreter named Max Wayem. Skarbek demands to see him too. For 3 hours, she is alone in a room with 2 men who have the power to shoot her on the spot. She bullies them. She cajoles them. She threatens them. A Jewish Polish woman stands in the heart of Nazi power and dictates the terms. She tells YM that American radio transmitters are already broadcasting his name as a war criminal. This is a complete fabrication, aimed straight at his paranoia. Outside, the hum of heavy bombers begins to vibrate the windows, likely American B-24s hitting targets in the Rhone Valley. Skarbek doesn't miss a beat. She points to the ceiling. "Do you hear that? Those are the tanks. They are here." The psychological pressure becomes unbearable. Wayem and Schenk crack. They agree to release the prisoners, but quietly. They provide a car. Skarbek is driven to the prison courtyard. The gates open. Kammer-Ertz, Fielding and Sorensen are led out. They are blinking in the sunlight, expecting to walk to a wall to be shot. Instead, they see Krystyna Skarbek, calm and composed, waiting by a sedan. "Get in," she says, as if picking them up from a dinner party. As they drive out past the bewildered guard, the scale of what she has done begins to sink in. She has robbed the Third Reich of 3 of its most prized captives without firing a single shot. The war ended. The Allies won. But for Krystyna Skarbek, peace proved to be a crueler adversary than the Nazis. The Europe of 1945 had no place for a thrill-seeking Polish Countess. Poland had been handed over to Soviet domination at the Yalta Conference. The country she had fought for was now a police state under a different flag. Her family estates were gone. Her mother had perished in the Holocaust. She was a hero without a country. The British government, navigating the delicate politics of the new Cold War, found the Polish exiles an embarrassment. The SOE was disbanded. Skarbek, the woman Churchill supposedly called his favourite spy, was discharged with 1 month's salary and left to drift. She applied for British citizenship, but ran into delays and red tape. The skills that made her a legend, killing silently, making explosives, lying to the Gestapo, were useless in peacetime London. The humiliation was slow and painful. She worked as a switchboard operator. She worked as a salesgirl at Harrods. She cleaned toilets as a stewardess on Union Castle Line cruise ships. She wore her medals on her uniform, a stewardess who had outranked the men she was now serving tea to. The adrenaline that had sustained her for 6 years was gone. It was replaced by the grey routine of survival in a battered city. On one of these ships, she met Dennis Muldowney. He was a steward with a history of mental instability. He became obsessed with her. Skarbek, who had handled SS officers and mountain bandits, tried to handle him with kindness, but his fixation grew dark and possessive. When she rejected his romantic advances, he couldn't take it. On June 15, 1952, at the Shelbourne Hotel in Earl's Court, her story ended, not on a battlefield, but in a lobby. Muldowney was waiting for her. When she came down the stairs, he stabbed her in the chest. The woman who had survived the invasion of Poland, the torture chambers of Hungary, the blizzards of the Tatras, and the firing squads of France, bled to death on the floor of a cheap London hotel. She was killed not by the enemies of freedom, but by a lonely, delusional man in the country she had served. For decades, her legacy lay buried in classified files. The men she saved lived long lives, but the woman who saved them was largely forgotten. It was a story of how industrial courage met tactical brilliance. Skarbek proved that in occupied Europe, the most dangerous weapon wasn't the tank or the bomber. It was the human spirit, refusing to accept the mathematics of defeat. Files released long after her death show the true extent of her contribution. Reports from 1944 credit her with preserving the entire southeastern resistance network at a critical moment. Without her bluff at Digne, the leadership of the Jockey network would have been liquidated, leaving the resistance leaderless as the Germans retreated. She was a creature of the storm, perfectly adapted to war's chaos, but lost in the silence that followed. The British Empire used her ferocity when its back was against the wall, but had no use for a warrior countess once the treaties were signed. Her legacy forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many other stories like hers are buried in the files? How many other women held the line while the world burned, only to be discarded when the smoke cleared? She remains the longest-serving female agent of the British Special Services, a woman who proved that courage has no gender. She walked into the prison at Digne, expecting death, and walked out with life. It was the ultimate victory of the individual over the system. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and click notification bell so you don't miss the next story.